Chapter 41. Empowered. After a crazy Friday with questions pouring in from the interview and final exams looming the following week, Professor Lemans met Evan in the Paradise Room to observe the tinies. Both of them had their black books and pens in hand. The books were nearly full, and the last entry had been March 15th. April 3rd, the professor wrote at the top of his page. He wrote several paragraphs about his meetings with the various committees and the public interview. Then, leaving the negativity aside, he recorded the interesting details of life in the dome. The tinies are 18 months old and have been in paradise since they were 10, he wrote. Most of the young men are growing beards and the girls have turned into young ladies. In 3 days, paradise goes on show, for better or worse. Odin and Ponzi have been in self-imposed isolation for the last few days, eating only honey buns, which must be stale and hard by now. Louis has had at least one weekly evening session with all the tinies, and some have come back for more. Zahir has taken many of his suggestions to heart and is showing good servant leadership. I've been impressed by Kenzie as well, who is reliable, selfless, and quick to respond to the needs of others. Louis has talked to Amy and discovered that she is still dealing with post-traumatic stress from the fatal accident, her own near drowning, and witnessing small animals die. She is depressed and anxious about Louis and Fredo aging, and feeling left out by a few important friends. Sadly, she is withdrawn from some social activities she once enjoyed. However, Louis put her with a new group of friends to build the solar ovens, and this seems to be helping. She seems happier since her evening session with Louis, and has taken the initiative to encourage and help others in true leadership form. The xylophone is now in working order and is a musical success. However, it failed to accomplish its secondary mission, and may have actually added to Amy's perception that she has been excluded. Mango tree production has gone well, and so far no one has been frightened by the bats. There is still no animal reproduction. A lot of digging is taking place on Mining Hill, but no one has found the real treasure, and it seems to have been forgotten. Honey buns have been restricted to 1 each, and I hope there will be a reduction in unnecessary weight gain soon. Louis tried to instigate a calisthenics program before school, but only a few participate. Swimming before breakfast has become more popular. Damien and Lima are leading this activity. Vanitha, Santa, Tina, Yuyan, Georgia, and even Dia occasionally come. Finally, some of them are using up their wad of tickets from the Beach Boys. The instructors seem to have more patience with the girls. Unfortunately, they've made the other guys feel like fools when they've attempted to learn. The tinies have been asking for flying machines ever since the gigantic butterflies. I'm researching paragliding kits and assessing the risk. Evan has given up on his investigation of what caused the moths and butterflies to grow rapidly. Fish egg experiments have been carried out at every level of radiation without any success. The original mutations for miniaturization were done at the single cell stage where I could control the DNA of the organism. I know that it's impossible for DNA to revert back to its natural state once an organism is fully formed. Aside from the sunflower and butterfly anomalies, gamma radiation has not affected any other developing insects or plants. The unusual growth we witnessed in the 2 miniaturized species may always remain a mystery. Cats now have bell collars to keep them from killing birds and rodents. This is helping. Apparently, Ripple is still collar-free and has avoided capture. I'm concerned she's gone feral. Amy attempted to add to my rules and provoked a heated debate among the tinies. Some preferred the elaborated version, while others wanted to keep the rules as simple as possible. I'm quite surprised that any preferred the elaborated version. Nancy and Louis have traded homes so that Louis can guard the store. Suddenly, Evan whispered, "Look who I see." Following his gaze, the professor caught sight of Odin and Ponzi reappearing from their hideout in the forest. Everyone else was sitting outside the store eating fried fish, baked potatoes, and a lavish salad. In a moment, the other teens alerted Louis, and he headed toward the returning offenders. "What's up, guys?" he inquired. "Well, we are getting a little hungry," Ponzi admitted, rubbing his narrow abdomen with a painful look on his face. "What's required for us to be proper members of Paradise again?" Odin asked with impudence. Uncle Louis folded his arms across his chest, resting on his protruding belly. "First of all, There needs to be a sincere apology to Nancy, he stated. Right, apology, Odin nodded. Yeah, we could probably do that. Turning around immediately, Odin walked over to Nancy, who still had bruising on her face and a large scar. Ponzi followed. Odin extended his grubby hand. Nancy was hesitant to take it. Odin gave up trying to shake hands. I'm sorry for getting violent, he confessed rather insincerely. Had you held the door open? Uncle Louis stopped him short. Odin, he said loudly, that is not an apology. You can't put the blame on Nancy. She was not the one in the wrong. You were. Oh, yeah, I guess that's right, Odin admitted grudgingly. I'm sorry, Nancy. I should not have hit you. Please forgive me. And you stole, Nancy reminded him harshly. Right. I shouldn't have stolen all those delicious raspberry honey buns either, and if I knew how fast they would become hard as rocks, I likely wouldn't have taken so many. Ponzi stepped forward. I'm sorry, Nancy, he said, sounding much more sincere. I'm sorry for stealing and that we hurt you. I won't do it again. Nancy had not acknowledged Odin's feigned confession, but she was responsive to Ponzi. Thank you, she said, looking at him. I accept your apology, Ponzi. And from now on, Uncle Louis added, speaking to Odin and Ponzi, it will be your duty to always take the compost out to the pile and clean up the scrap pots. Really? The compost? Ponzi complained, wrinkling his nose. That's so disgusting. Oh, that's just the start, Uncle Louis said firmly. For the next 2 weeks, every day after lunch and until dinner time, you will be building with rocks. You promised the girls an outdoor patio, and Rainbow Hill also needs a staircase. I will personally oversee that these projects are completed. Odin and Ponzi's eyes bulged out and their mouths dropped open. But that's nap time, Odin protested. I don't work in the afternoons. Nap time is over for the next 2 weeks, Uncle Louis informed them. Get more sleep at night. He glanced over at the pile of rocks still lying beside the store that had been traded for honey buns. The rocks have already been mined, he stated calmly, so we'll have an easy start. What? Odin retorted. How is that easy? Are you going to help us carry those rocks up the hill? Oh no, Uncle Louis laughed. I'm too old for that kind of work. The young men looked at one another in dismay. And what if we don't show up for work? Odin protested. It's very simple, Uncle Louis smiled. No work, no food. And since I'm now sleeping in the store, it will be a lot harder to steal supplies. On the other side of the dome, Evan looked over at the professor and they both shared a quiet chuckle. The professor noted the details in his book under the heading, A New Experiment for the Grumblers. So who is going to bring us orange juice? Odin demanded, looking over at the girls sitting by the store. No one offered. Orange juice is a special treat, Uncle Louis told him. If you do a great job on the patios, then maybe someone will feel inclined to bring you refreshments. But the Beach Boys got orange juice. That was because one generous person offered to provide, Uncle Louis reminded him. Lily put up her hand. I'll bring the orange juice, she said, smiling at Ponzi. Ponzi smiled back. Still angry, Odin inquired proudly, Can we have dinner now? Have you done any work yet? Uncle Louis reminded him. We're too hungry to work, Odin complained. Sorry, Uncle Louis replied, repeating, No work, no food. Professor Lemans remarked wryly, I dare say, Louis is enjoying himself. Evan chuckled. I think you've empowered the teacher. It's about time those two had consequences placed on their actions. Louis has come up with an appropriate hard labor plan. Looking up quickly at Evan, Professor Lemans wrote the word, empowered. Then he added, Louis gives fair consequences and feels empowered. Let's hope the ethics committee doesn't think up a hard labor plan for me. Ponzi was miserably rubbing his belly. What do we have to do for dinner? He asked. With a smile, Uncle Louis said, Once you've carried all of these rocks up the hill, you can have dinner. You won't even need to bring anything to trade. All the rocks? The troublemakers protested wearily, gazing up at Rainbow Hill in the distance. That will take hours, Odin whined. but Uncle Louie wasn't giving in. The scientists watched with interest as the grumbling tinies found carry carts and began pushing the rocks up the hill. Lily ran into the store to squeeze some orange juice. Chapter 42. Overcoming. While they were serving breakfast the next morning and Amy was frying the fish, she heard the train come in. Kenzie and Milan rushed out to unload it. She was just about to help herself to a honey bun, having given the daily quota to everyone else, when she heard a strange noise. A high-pitched squeal was sounding outside. No one had ever heard anything like it. Running out the door, Amy saw flashing lights in the train. Everyone else was gathering around to see what was going on. "Odin's in there!" Damien called out. "I just saw his head." "He's on the train?" Franz laughed. "Are you serious?" "It was your idea," Damien retorted. "Never ever give Odin ideas." Eventually, the door slid open, and a red-faced Odin and laughing Ponzi emerged. Once they were off the train and the doors were closed, the alarm stopped and the train backed out as normal. "Thought we'd try it," Odin swaggered. "It can't hurt to test all our options." Uncle Louie came running over, shaking his head in disbelief. What were you thinking?" he asked the attempted stowaways as he tried to catch his breath. His face was quite red. "Let's go have a chat immediately." "But we have to have a talk with you tonight," Odin grumbled. "Obviously, you need more talks than you're getting," Uncle Louie retorted, still panting heavily. "I don't understand what goes through your heads." "Not much," Lima scoffed, and everyone laughed. And so, the morning began with an hour delay, as Uncle Louie had an emergency session with his most tutored, but still unresponsive students. As Amy walked to the gardens later that afternoon to get the carry cart of vegetables, she hummed a little melody. Odin and Ponzi had begun her patio, having worked on it all day after the failed train escape, and it was looking great. Uncle Louie was keeping them under careful supervision, especially since he'd heard from Zahir and the professor about Odin's intentions to break free. Passing by the farmland, two fluffy sheep glanced up at Amy as they munched on grass. She tried to imagine how they would look once Kenzie cut off all their wool. Will they look like they got a great haircut, she wondered, or will they look naked? And how will Vanitha make it into rugs? Bojo ran across the path with his nose to the ground. Obsessed, he followed some scent into the garden, and suddenly she heard a loud meow. Looking up in the direction of the sound, she saw Ripple. No one had seen Ripple since the collars had been put on the cats. The orange cat was still without a collar, and she was hissing at Bojo. Charlie and Santa were picking the tomatoes for the salad. "There's Ripple!" Amy called out. "She's in the garden. Who has her collar?" "Nancy does," Charlie told her. "I'll see if I can catch her, and we'll lock her up in the shed." While Santa loaded Amy's cart with vegetables, Amy and Charlie charged into the garden to catch Ripple. However, they came out empty-handed. Ripple had disappeared once again. Having finished loading Amy's newly built carry cart, Santa called out merrily, "See you when surfing is over." Charlie shook his head unhappily as Santa ran off. "I know how it feels," Amy said softly to Charlie as they continued to hunt for the cat through tomato vines and under cucumber leaves. "It's really hard to share special friends." "It is," Charlie shrugged, looking all around the shed for the orange-striped cat, yet in vain. He turned back to Amy. "I wish I could dance," he lamented, "and surf and sing crazy songs, but that's just not me." Amy nodded slowly. She remembered how Uncle Louie had reminded her who she was when she was feeling down. "But you keep all the gardens looking amazing and provide food for everyone to eat," she encouraged. "You know so much, and the farm animals love you. That's what I admire about you. Don't try to be someone else." "Thanks," Charlie smiled sadly, picking up Bojo for a cuddle. "Santa used to say the same. Now all she talks about is the stuff she does with Lima." Wandering through the flower gardens, they searched for the orange-striped tabby while Bojo ran ahead with his nose to the ground. They discovered a rabbit under the dahlias, but not a cat. "I need to go help with dinner," Amy said finally, heading toward her cart. "There's a lot to do." Charlie nodded. "I'll keep an eye out for Ripple," he promised. "If I find her, I'll make sure she gets a collar." "Thank you, Charlie," Amy called out. She took the handles of her new cart and headed to the store. It was a bigger cart, and it steered well. 6 more weeks of honey buns would fulfill her trade with Kenzie and Vahid. Freddo was lying in the sun along the side of the stone pathway. Amy was surprised he had wandered down the hill. Bending over, she ruffled his fur. Dozing in the warmth, he moaned, licked her hand, and closed his eyes. "You don't usually sleep here, Freddo," she murmured, stroking his head kindly. "You look all tired out, you poor old dog. Either that or you're just loving the warm sunshine." Freddo's tail flopped a few times, but he didn't get up. It was easy to tell he was enjoying his sleep. He certainly wasn't in the mood to follow her to the store. She met Tina, Kenzie, and Vahid near the store. "You should come go-karting with us tonight," Tina suggested. "It's so fun." With a deep sigh, Amy admitted, "It brings back a lot of bad memories for me. I haven't actually gone down the hill since the accident." "That was a terrible accident," Kenzie acknowledged. "Since then, a lot of us have made our go-kart safer. Mine steers really well. If you want, you can take a ride with me." Amy hesitated. Her first inclination was to avoid go-karting forever. But then she thought about Uncle Louie's encouragement and how much fun it used to be. Did she always want to be labeled a whoosh? Kenzie noticed the hesitation and reminded her, "We've been riding almost every night, and it's been safe." Tina's freckled face lit up with a kind smile. "You should come, Amy," she encouraged. Vahid assured her, "Kenzie is a very safe driver." With a quick glance behind him, he saw Franz approaching. Smiling, he added loudly, "But you may not want to ride with Franz." Franz was right behind them. "Hey, what do you mean?" he asked indignantly, tossing his stringy brown hair out of his eyes. Tina laughed. "The guys race a lot of the time." "But we've never had an accident," Franz argued. "Aside from your wheels popping off when you hit the train track," Tina recalled. "Yeah, but no one got hurt." The others laughed. "Or the time that y'all smashed into each other," Kenzie chuckled. "That was planned, fully planned," Franz retorted. Amy smiled. "I'll ride with you," she said quietly to her freckle-faced friend. Looking up with surprise, Kenzie said, "Great! After dinner, then." As Amy helped prepare the meal, she felt more lighthearted than she had in weeks. She was looking forward to go-karting with everyone else. The thought still scared her a little, but it had been way too long since she'd enjoyed fun times with the others. Happy feelings always led to melodies, and she hummed a merry tune. "Kenzie is a safe driver," she told herself, chopping apples. "You're singing today," Nancy observed as she kneaded bread for dinner. "I haven't heard you sing for ages." "I'm going go-karting tonight," Amy told her proudly, pouring oil into the pan. "I'm going to go and try and overcome my fears." "Good for you, Amy," Nancy praised. Olan looked up with admiration as he started to wash the vegetables for the salad, but he didn't say anything out loud. When she started frying 4 of the 20 apple honey buns that she was allowed to make, Amy heard Georgia playing the xylophone. It was now in full working order, and the sound caused delightful shivers to run up and down Amy's spine. "That's a really pretty tune," she heard Zahir say outside the deck. "What if we tried this at the end?" She listened carefully as Zahir tried out a different ending. Amy loved it. "I'm not sure it fits," Georgia said, unimpressed. "What about this?" And Georgia added a little extra to the song. Amy thought Zahir's attempt was better, but Zahir didn't say anything. He simply added a flourish to Georgia's melody. "I like mine the way that it is," Georgia stated disagreeably. "You're not the only musician, you know." "Of course not," Zahir responded with a slight laugh. "Your song is beautiful, Georgia. Keep it the way it is." "Thank you," she replied. In a kinder tone of voice, she assured him, "I still love you." "I love you too," he murmured. Taking out the first batch of honey buns, Amy mumbled defensively, "Zahir may not be the only musician, but he's definitely the best." Nancy and Milan looked over at her with curious glances, but neither one replied. For the next hour, as the kitchen staff prepared the food, they were well entertained with beautiful xylophone music, as various tunes were tried and some turned into full-length pieces. The two songwriters didn't always agree, and Amy felt Georgia was rather hard on Zahir, but once the melodies got established outside the thin kitchen walls, she hummed along. "Wow, working in the kitchen has never been so enjoyable," Nancy commented. "All this music to give us joy." The sun was still shining brightly when dinner was over. Amy cleaned up quickly and ran outside. She saw Uncle Louis standing on Mining Hill, supervising Odin and Ponce as they mined stones for the next patio. Pushing the carry cart quickly up Rainbow Hill, Amy said hello to all the animals, patted the deer, and then left her furry friends to help themselves. Fredo didn't show up, but Amy assumed he was sleeping. She didn't have time to look for him. Eagerly she ran to join the other teenagers. Kenzie was halfway down the hill, racing Zahir as she approached nervously. Emma and Rusty were on either side of the carts, chasing them down. Everyone was cheering for their favorite, and the two young men were laughing. They made it safely to the tracks and stopped without incident. Amy waited to walk up the hill with Kenzie. He and Zahir were coming toward her, pulling their go-karts behind them. Georgia caught up to them. With a pleasant smile on his dark face, Zahir called out, "Hey, Amy, I hear you go-karting tonight." Before she could answer, Kenzie replied, "I told her I'd drive safely, so no more racing for me." Zahir nodded. "Way to go," he encouraged the copper-haired girl. "But won't all the animals be expecting you?" Georgia asked. "I took them their food already," Amy assured her. "They'll only miss the cuddles." Zahir looped the rope over his shoulder as he and Georgia raced to the top. Amy followed her pale-skinned friend up the hill. Watching everyone else race down with their revamped carts, she remembered the thrill of speed, the wind in her face, the air rushing past. But then the voice of defeat chimed in. "But I killed someone on this hill," she fretted, just like she had hundreds of times since the accident. "But I didn't mean to," she argued back, "and the bump is gone. I'm not going to drive." "What if you hurt someone else? How will you ever live with yourself?" "Uncle Louis shares my guilt," she recalled as she trudged upwards. "Even the professor blames himself for the bump, and now the bump is gone. Kenzie and Zahir took it away. No one else has been hurt." Still, Amy's hands were sweaty, and she felt like she had a rock inside her stomach when they reached the top. Unresolved guilt lay heavy on her shoulders. Zahir and Georgia climbed into their cart and darted down. She saw Vahid shyly offer Tina a ride. The tall, thin girl accepted with a pleased look on her face. Damien and Vinitha had reached the top. "Hey, Amy!" the blonde surfer called out. "This is good! You're getting braver! If you can go-kart again, you can surf again." He chuckled. "I'll be waiting." Amy didn't respond. Her face was very white. Damien and Vinitha watched as Kenzie stepped into the front seat of his bright red go-kart. 2 white stripes ran down the side. Anxiously, Amy slid into the seat behind him. She held on to the sides of the cart tightly. Rusta and Emma appeared, eager for another race. "Are you ready?" Kenzie asked, looking back with a friendly smile. She nodded, and down they went with the dogs running beside them. The wind whipped Amy's long hair all over, and it was hard to see. She gripped the sides of the cart even tighter. They made it safely to the bottom, not quite to the tracks, but certainly close. "Want to do it again?" Kenzie laughed. Breathlessly, Amy nodded. Tying her copper-brown hair into a bun, she was better prepared. They walked up and rode down again. And again. And again. After those few runs, Amy managed to relax and thoroughly enjoy herself. Many of her old friends encouraged her. She was delighted to feel part of the group again and have overcome her fears. She thanked Kenzie gratefully. As the sun began to set in the sky, she followed her friend up the hill, anticipating another ride. Zahir caught up to them. "I won't race this time," he promised Amy, "if you'll take a turn with me." He looked over at Kenzie. "Are you okay with that?" "Sure," Kenzie agreed with a shrug. Amy accepted the offer happily. She looked for Georgia and saw that she was riding with Damien. Vinitha was standing alone, so Kenzie suggested she come with him. Reaching the top, Zahir positioned the go-kart and then motioned for Amy to sit in the back. It had been a long time since Zahir had asked her to do something with him. Hopping in, Amy was thrilled to ride down the hill with her old friend. Zahir didn't go too fast or too far. It was just a fun ride. "Want to go again?" he asked when they came to a stop. "That was so fun," Amy exclaimed, climbing out of the cart. I'd love another ride. When they reached the top of the hill, Zahir positioned the cart and suddenly slipped into the back seat. Oh no, I'm not driving, she protested. I trust you, he said with a kind smile. You'll be fine. You used to love driving. Aren't you afraid that I'll hurt you? She pleaded. No, not at all, Zahir said. I want you to drive. For a long moment, Amy looked at Zahir anxiously, but he wasn't moving from the back. His bright blue eyes shone with assurance. In her mind, Amy struggled with old fears, but she knew that she didn't want to be a whoosh. She didn't want to be a wave that fizzled out before it gained intensity, a disappointment to all the surfers, or her best friends. She didn't want to keep giving up before she had learned to do something well. Still smiling, Zahir spoke gently. You can do it, Amy. There's no more bump. It's gone. You'll be fine. Energized by his quiet confidence, she slowly climbed in and took a deep breath. They started moving down the hill. The go-kart steered well, and the hill was smooth. The breeze blew over Amy's face and whipped back one strand of wavy hair that hadn't stayed tied up. A smile broke out on her face. As they rushed down the hill quickly, she turned the steering wheel to head towards the tracks, and the go-kart obeyed perfectly. They weren't going fast enough to make it all the way, but Amy felt very happy when they reached the bottom of the hill. Stepping out of the cart, she looked over at Zahir and laughed. We made it, she cheered. We made it safely. I'm proud of you, he smiled warmly. Let's go again. On her next try, the go-kart almost reached the tracks. And now you're racing, Zahir teased with twinkling eyes. That didn't take long. Thank you for encouraging me, she laughed merrily. I never liked being a whoosh. I don't think you're a whoosh, he assured her. But I do think that maybe both of us sometimes struggle with doubt. For a moment they shared a look of understanding, but then Georgia came running over to whisk Zahir away. Chapter 43. Heavy Losses. It was too dark to see clearly, so everyone took their carts back to the forest. Georgia and Zahir walked ahead of the others. As everyone trooped home, laughing about silly things that had happened, Amy suddenly heard Zahir shout, Fredo! No, not Fredo! Everyone ran over. Zahir was bent over his pet in the very same place that Amy had last patted the sleepy old dog. One look at his stiff, unyielding body, and everyone knew that Fredo had died. With tears pouring down his face, Zahir picked up the stiff, golden body. Uncle Louis heard the commotion and came running from the store. In the dim light, Amy saw the fixed, glassy-eyed stare in Fredo's eyes as his head dangled awkwardly over Zahir's arm. It was a look she remembered well. As tears streamed down her cheeks, Amy longed to comfort Zahir, but Georgia was already on one side. Kenzie, Fahid, and Charlie were on the other. Uncle Louis sent Lima and Franz for shovels. Sobbing, Amy followed the sad group. Losing Fredo was painful. He had always been such a faithful, loving friend. I want him buried on Rainbow Hill, Zahir cried, right near my house. Please, Uncle Louis. Of course, Uncle Louis said, coming in behind the group and rubbing Zahir's back affectionately. Are you okay to carry him all the way up the hill? I am, Zahir stated firmly. Oh, poor Fredo. I wish I'd been with him. I didn't know he was ready to die. Tears ran down his face as he pleaded, Uncle Louis, I feel terrible. I should have been there. I should have stayed with him. I can't believe he died all alone. Inside, Amy had the same regrets. Had she not been go-karting, she would have been feeding all the animals. She would have realized something was wrong with Fredo when he didn't show up. She could have stayed with him so that in his final moments, he hadn't suffered alone. Zahir and his friends trudged ahead. Amy trailed behind. A terrible sadness was filling her heart once again as she thought of all the lonely times Fredo had come to her side. How she wished she had been there for him. She felt that she had lost a favorite pet as well. Everyone except Odin and Ponzi shared in the burial and the sad silence around the grave. "I'll paint you a picture of him," George assured Zahir. "It will be a reminder of your favorite dog." Zahir nodded appreciatively. "That would be really nice," he said. The loss haunted a few of the tinies the next day. Not even the sun shone. The sky remained overcast behind the black crisscross patterns above. The solar ovens couldn't heat up to cook the bread. All through the school lessons and while they worked on their projects, no one could experiment without the sun, and the merriment was lacking. Amy didn't sing in the kitchen that afternoon. No one played on the xylophone. Zahir hardly said a word all day, not even to Georgia. Most of his friends gave him space to grieve. But Amy saw Uncle Louis give him a couple of hugs. Kenzie and Vahid stayed by his side. Later that evening, Amy avoided Rose's Hill once she was finished in the kitchen. She didn't feel like having fun. Heading to Rainbow Hill with her carry cart overflowing with food scraps, she wanted to be alone with her animal friends. On her way up the hill, she caught a glimpse of Ripple, just a quick flash of orange stripes behind a tree. "I'm going to get you," she said quietly. "You're getting a collar tonight." Slowly she snuck up on the cat. Ripple was well hidden behind a tree, only the wildcat had forgotten about one long body part. Amy smiled as she saw the orange tail twitching from behind the oak. As soon as she was close enough, she grabbed the tail. With an angry meow, Ripple turned to run, but Amy was more determined to catch her than the cat was to get away. Snatching Ripple up in her arms, she suddenly saw the feathers on the ground. Pretty, brightly colored feathers, yellow, green, and red. Nearby were some bones and 2 skinny legs. Horrified, Amy almost dropped the squirming, scratching cat. She couldn't speak. She was too shocked to even cry. Ripple had killed Colors. With a vice-like grip on the back of the animal's neck, Amy marched down the hill with Ripple in her arms. Ignoring the sharp claws that were ripping at her clothes, she took the striped orange cat to the store. Thankfully, Nancy was still there, organizing supplies on the shelves. Without a word, Amy handed the killer cat to her friend. "Oh, thank you," Nancy said at first. Then she looked more closely at Amy. "What did Ripple do?" Amy just shook her head as tears began to roll down her face. She didn't want to yell at Nancy or anyone else, and she was very afraid if she opened her mouth, hurtful, nasty words would come out. "Did Ripple kill another bird?" Amy nodded and fled. Chapter 44. The Sad Song. With tears flooding her eyes, Amy blindly pushed the carry cart of kitchen scraps up the hill. Then, just in case they were watching on the other side of the hazy sky, she poured out her heart to Professor and Evan, telling them what had just happened. Sadly, on the other side of paradise, neither scientist was there at that moment to hear or to see. Leaving the cart so the animals could help themselves, Amy fled to her room, closed the door, and dove into bed. She cried and cried and cried some more. Eventually, once go-karting was over, the other girls came home and headed to their rooms. The shouts of laughter down by the lake finally subsided, and paradise became peaceful and quiet, with only the occasional call of a loon. However, the peace and quiet wasn't comforting. Amy felt the blackest hole ever inside her heart. It didn't seem like it could be filled or healed. Alone in her big white bed, Amy kept imagining the evil cat Ripple pouncing on her bright, beautiful little bird. She was filled with remorse that she hadn't been there to save him. "I'll never see Colors again," she mourned sadly. "He'll never be perched on my windowsill, waking me up in the morning, or flying down from the sky to sit on my shoulder." She remembered Color's silly, jealous attacks on Freddo. "And I'll never see Freddo again either," she sobbed, still missing the faithful dog dreadfully. Fredo had always been waiting for her to visit Rainbow Hill in the evenings and was so happy to waltz over for his morning cuddles when his master was out fishing. Both pets had died a day apart. In the past, only happy, thankful feelings had overflowed into melodies, but now Amy felt a strange, compelling desire to sing a sad song. She felt she must take all the suffocating pain and emptiness and release it from her heart. She just knew it was something she had to do. Rising out of bed, she pulled on the white ribbon dress that she had worn for the first celebration in paradise. The white dress was her special singing dress. With great sadness, she took off her shining moon necklace and hung it on her bedpost. With a sob, she thought, I didn't save any of my animal friends. I wasn't even there for them when they died. I can't wear this. Tiptoeing down the spiral staircase and out of the house, Amy closed the door quietly behind her. I must sing softly, she told herself. I don't want anyone to hear me. I just need to sing alone. Only a little moonlight gleamed through the darkness of the night, and before Amy had reached the clearing, a passing cloud obscured the light completely. She was thankful for the dark. To one side, an unusual blue glow dimly illuminated the horizon, but she didn't know what it was, and she didn't care. Knowing it was very late at night, she didn't expect anyone to be looking in on paradise. Grief was strangling her heart as tears streamed down her face. Deep inside, a quiet, haunting melody was building. Before she knew the words, she stood on the hill looking out towards the lake and softly hummed the music. First and foremost, the sad song was about colors being killed and Fredo dying, but it was also about losing Rosa and the little gray rabbit. The sadness encompassed the memory of giant moths and butterflies lying lifeless on the ground, Damien looking at Venitha the way he used to look at her, Zahir and Georgia spending all of their time together and none of it with her. It was about Uncle Louis getting old and her fears that he might die. It was about trying to help the professor explain his rules and only making things worse. It was even about restrictions on her first success ever, the creation of honey buns.
There's a dark feeling inside,
she began softly,
and I never wanted to feel it. I felt it when I cried, when colors and Fredo died, when special friends left my side, and I'm falling into the darkness. Joy used to be in my heart. Thankfulness was such a part. But now all I feel is this pain, and my tears, they run down like hot rain.
Those tears began to flow so hard that Amy couldn't sing any more. With her head in her hand, she stood on the hill and wept. A rustling sound made her turn around. Amy, a familiar voice whispered. Please don't cry, Amy. Sad eyes met hers, and strong arms reached out. You're making me cry, Zahir told her gently as he drew her close. Together they cried on each other's shoulders, and the blackness turned to gray. I heard about colors, her old friend whispered. I'm so sorry. Amy sobbed quietly. And you must be missing Fredo. I sure am. I miss him so much, Zahir admitted, keeping his voice low. I keep remembering how cold and stiff he was in my arms, and it just breaks my heart. He used to sleep with me every night, and now he's not there anymore. And I wasn't even beside him to say goodbye, Amy. I didn't stay with him when he needed me the most. They both cried a little more. I couldn't sleep, Zahir whispered. And then I heard your song, and I knew we needed to sing it together. But I can't, Amy told him sadly, pulling away. Zahir, I can't sing this song with anyone. It's way too sad. Looking at her thoughtfully, Zahir let her go. With a sigh, he glanced toward the lake and stroked his beard. Then we need a new song, he suggested. One that we can both sing. Collapsing in a heap of white gauze and ribbons, Amy looked up through her tears with a hopeful expression. Like what? As wispy clouds passed over the moon, a little light shone across the water. Standing on the hill, still gazing out over paradise, Zahir began humming a melody that was soft and gentle, but had a sweet, uplifting tone. That's pretty, Amy encouraged. After a few minutes of humming, Zahir turned around and sang quietly,
Sometimes when I'm sad, when I'm feeling bad, when I can't find glad, I need not to doubt, I need to reach out, I need to turn around and find a special friend.
Reaching out his hand, he pulled Amy to her feet. His kind smile was such a welcome sight. She remembered how much she loved Zahir's smile, especially when he smiled at her. Can you sing with me? He asked. Amy nodded. Still holding his hand, she sang the song softly, an octave higher than his. The sound of their voices harmonizing together stirred old feelings and happy memories of the times they had sung together as children, simple though the songs had been. Singing the words a few times together and keeping their voices low, they reached the last line on the third round. Managing to smile, Amy sang along.
I need to turn around and find a special friend.
Zahir began trailing off as though the song was over, but Amy wasn't finished. She reached out for his other hand and looked up at him gratefully.
Because that's how I know my heart will mend.
Zahir laughed quietly and pulled her close. For a few more moments they stood together and Amy savored Zahir's warm embrace. It was the best hug ever. The black heaviness lifted. Are you okay now? I'm so much better, she assured him quietly. Thank you, Zahir. I've missed singing with you. She lifted the shining moon ornament that hung from his gold chain. You rescued me, she said. He laughed softly. Glad to hear it. I feel better too, he sighed. Thanks for singing with me. And thanks for your beautiful card. It meant a lot. As he stepped back, he whispered, I love you, Amy. For a moment, Amy was transfixed. She didn't know what to say. Love was a strong word. Aside from Uncle Louis, no Tiny had ever said that to her before. Looking at Zahir in astonishment, a tinge of fear crept into her heart. She knew it would break the rule to say, I love you, back. Suddenly, she realized she had broken the rule by hugging Zahir. She stared in astonishment, and then she began to doubt Zahir really meant those precious words when he spent all his time with Georgia. Uncertain what she should do or say, the anxious thoughts passed over her face. She felt she needed to get away before she made things worse. Taking a few steps toward the mansion, she waved goodbye. Thank you, she said nervously. Good night, Zahir. With a puzzled frown, Zahir hesitated. He looked as though he had something more to say, but then he changed his mind. Turning around, he trudged back into the shadowy forest. Amy didn't see his shoulders slump or his head bow down. Looking up at her dark house, the girl in the long white dress decided she wasn't ready to go back in. While she had been unsure how to reply to Zahir and was nervous about breaking the rule, light and joy were chasing all her shadows away. She wanted to stay out there on the clearing, even if it was only in the faint light of the moon. Sitting down on the hill, Amy looked out over the peaceful view. Hugs are truly the best, she thought with a smile. They take the pain away. I thought I wanted to be all alone, but really, I needed a special friend. I'm so thankful for Zahir. I love Zahir more than anyone else. And oh, I wish I could tell him. Chapter 45. Overheard. Little did Amy, or Zahir, or anyone inside Paradise know that a group of scientists were coming to observe them the very next day. However, Professor Lemans was very well aware and was working late into the night. He had put up all the posters in the viewing hall and arranged the display several times. Then he had marked the last set of molecular biology exams he'd ever mark, with the termination of his teaching career, and was attempting to finish a brief outline of the tiny experiment. All the lights were off in the office so that he wouldn't disturb the tiny sleep, but a blue glow emanated from his computer. Working away in the darkness over the speakers, he heard a door open and shut in Paradise. He was surprised that anyone was still awake. It was nearly 1 o'clock in the morning. Unconcerned, he continued to leaf through the records in his black book and type up the more relevant details of his experiment. The first 20 scientists would be arriving at 10 in the morning, and he wanted to hand them his outline, knowing this information would be helpful for them to consider. Dimly, he became aware of the saddest strain of music he'd ever heard, and then he heard the words.
There's a dark feeling inside, and I never wanted to feel it.
It was unmistakably Amy. He hadn't heard her sing for months. The professor whirled around in his chair and rushed over to the dome. Standing on Rainbow Hill, in the beautiful white flowing dress that was one of his favorite purchases at the fairy petal shop, was his beloved girl. He fully intended to love all the Tinies equally, and he would never have freely admitted that Amy was so extra special to him. But in reality, that is just the way it was. Hearing her sing such a tragic song caused him great distress, and then she began crying. Such deep sobs brought back the dark days of his own life. Her song encapsulated the tragic, painful moments when he'd realized his precious family had been lost in the fatal plane crash. Watching her, he thought, "Sat alors, this can't be. Amy used to be the happiest of all the Tinies. How can she possibly be feeling so sad in my beautiful world? I thought she was getting over all these heartbreaks." Watching Amy sob all alone on the hill was agonizing for the professor. He longed to reach out to her, to tell her that he loved her, to ease her suffering. But there was no way for him to do so. He pulled out his phone to text Louis, but then he slid it back into his pocket. It's far too late for Louis to still be in the cave, he thought. Surely he'll hear. Pacing back and forth, the professor's heart was breaking with the sobs coming through the speakers. Oh la la, if only I could give that girl a hug, he thought. I'd let her know she's very special to me. I'd tell her it's all going to be okay and that she will feel better in time. He peered in, anticipating that Louis would run out of the store and head across the field to the hill, but no one was responding. Why isn't someone there for her, he thought. Where are her friends? Surely someone cares about her. Faintly, he heard a door open and close. In a few moments, he saw a lanky young man join her on the clearing. When he heard his whisper, he sighed with relief. Zahir, he smiled. He still cares about Amy. This is exactly who needed to come. Seeing the two Tinies cry together on the hill was very touching and disturbing. Why are they both so sad, he questioned, as he listened carefully. He heard that they had both lost their pets, and he began to understand. I wish I could make all the Tinies live longer, he thought regretfully. I wish I could undo death. As much as I have tried to make their world perfect, death is the one enemy I just can't defeat. And then Zahir began to hum a new tune. The professor ran to get his phone and pressed the arrow to record the music. Once the two began singing together, the song was so beautiful that tears welled up in his eyes. I'm not sure who Zahir gets his talent from, the professor thought, but Amy's voice is just as lovely as Wendy's. I could listen to her all day. His wife had often sung around the house and performed beautiful solos in the church choir. As the two ended the song and Zahir headed home, the professor didn't hear the soft parting remark or notice the lack of response, but he was overjoyed to see the two Tinies had reconnected. Zahir is so good for my Amy, he smiled happily to himself. Maybe now they'll realize they need to be together. I've been hoping for this. He pondered the matter, thinking, it's too bad that the xylophone had the opposite effect to what I planned. Perhaps I should send in some project just for the two of them to do together, so that I can keep things going in the right direction. I could instruct Louis to ensure that only Amy and Zahir work on it. But no, he thought, Evan would never forgive me if I interfered in such an overt way. I can't instruct Louis to force them together. They must have, well, free will. He thought hard. But maybe I can think of something else, something like the xylophone. Maybe now that they've finally reconciled, they'll be more inclined to choose to work on something together. What could it be? Pacing in front of the dome, the professor noticed that Amy had not moved from the hill, but he could tell she was at peace. There were no more sobs or cries of distress. He racked his brain to come up with a new idea, and then he had it. Another thank you celebration, he thought. That's it. Oh la la, they are the singers. They'll have to work on the song. The fact that another celebration would coincide well with all the scientists coming was an added bonus. It would give a positive message that the Tinies were fabulously happy with their existence. Perhaps in time the whole world would hear the song. Quickly the professor texted a message to Louis, even though he was sure he wouldn't get it until the next day or night, and then he returned to his desk to finish up his report. To his surprise, an answer came back from Louis right away. "Will do," Louis had written. Is he still in that cave? He thought in disbelief. Oh la la, what is he researching this late at night? No wonder he didn't hear Amy. It was almost 2 a.m. when the professor closed down his computer and tidied up the papers on his desk. It was time to head home. He texted Louis one more time to see if there would be a response. Sure enough, there was. What are you working on? Jax asked, instigating a video call. Just got carried away with some reading, Louis smiled. Anything interesting? Always, Louis responded. I love learning. Jax chuckled. He knew Louis loved nature shows and touring various places on planet Earth. There was so much to discover on the internet. Anxious to get home and go to sleep before his big day, the professor didn't ask exactly what Louis had been learning, but told him all about the sad song he had witnessed and the wonderful reunion of Amy and Zahir. He was distraught that Amy still struggled with such unhappy feelings, but confident that her happiness would soon be restored. Saying goodbye, he got up, grabbed his keys, and walked over to take one last parting glance at the dome. Amy had fallen asleep on the hill. My poor girl, he thought, shaking his head. He wished that he could pick her up and put her back in her bed. Taking the quick exit in the corner of his office, he walked down the stairs, through the basement, and then up to the other side to the one-way door that led directly into the parking lot. Absent-mindedly, he headed to his car. Do I have my phone? He suddenly asked himself. He patted his lab coat pocket. The phone wasn't there. I must have left it on my desk, he sighed. Turning around with a grumble, he hurried to the main doors of the biome. He would have to go through all the locked doors and corridors to get back in. As time-consuming as that would be, after the mishaps with overheating and the flood, he was determined to ensure his phone was never dead or left behind in the office. Re-entering the biome with his biosphere card, the professor ran through the rainforest jungle, past all the sleeping monkeys, and into the mirrored hall. He couldn't enter the drop floor without the icon on his phone, but the door to the viewing hall opened easily with the card that he always wore around his neck. Running through the viewing hall that would soon be filled with scientists, he came to the locked door into the train supply room. This door required the code, so he quickly punched in 0 suffering 66. Salors! It's not true, he told himself anxiously, as he entered the supply room, ran through the long corridors and in and out of the stationary elevator entrances. Finally, back in the office, he picked up his phone from his desk. The Tinies are still suffering, even in paradise, he admitted to himself. I can't truly say they are any happier than the teenagers in my world. I have 20 scientists coming this morning, and my hypothesis is full of holes. The timing couldn't be worse.